Hey everybody, Dia Davidson here with another conversation on race. This time we're talking about the state of Black Kentucky. And joining me now is Sadiqa Reynolds. She is the president and CEO of the Louisville chapter of the Urban League. Sadiqa, thank you so much for taking this time out of your very busy schedule.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, let's talk about race and let's talk about Black Kentucky. Right now, Black Kentucky is hurting because of the decision in the Breonna Taylor case. Let's talk a little bit about your thoughts on it, the decision that came down, and where do we move from here?
Well, I want to say this. Black Kentucky has been hurting even before the Breonna Taylor case. But if we want to talk about that case specifically, and I think that we have to talk about this grand jury process. I think it's important for people to understand that Kenny Walker, the boyfriend of Breonna Taylor, who was in the home with her on the night that she was killed by police, he also fired a weapon and in fact struck one of the officers. Kenny Walker was indicted in less than 3 minutes. That case went to the grand jury. He was indicted and he was put in jail. He was held in custody. In less than 3 minutes, that grand jury process. And now we see the Attorney General tell us that he took a case to the grand jury and for 2 days presented evidence, and they could find no indictment for the officers related to killing Breonna Taylor. What we have to acknowledge then is that there is a different system of grand jury process, one for you and I and another for police officers. That is the reason that people are protesting in Louisville, Kentucky and across this country. It is because we understand that justice for Black people in America is not very available to us. We understand that there is a different justice system and people are tired of it. The other thing that we heard from the Attorney General as he talked about the Breonna Taylor case, we heard him say that the grand jury was made aware of the fact, or he said the fact, that there was a witness who says that he heard the police announce themselves. Remember, this is a case where there was a no-knock warrant, and then there was a supervisor who changed it to knock and announce, and police said, oh, we did announce ourselves. And so there is allegedly one other person who says, in fact, he heard police. What the Attorney General doesn't say is where that person was situated. That person was upstairs and outside, number one. The second thing that we haven't heard from the Attorney General, and we don't know if he presented it to the grand jury, is that there were multiple other people, maybe something like 11 other neighbors who did not hear police announce themselves. In fact, there were 2 neighbors who called 911 independently to say, we need police here. They are shooting, we need help. And then of course we have the 911 call from Kenny Walker. He calls in to say, I need help, my girlfriend's been hurt, someone came in, she's been shot. So you have this contradictory information, and we don't know if that was actually presented to the grand jury. We also heard the Attorney General say that Breonna Taylor had been shot 6 times. Well, the death certificate said 5 times. Was it 5? Was it 6? These are things that are questions of fact that a jury should have been allowed to decide. And believe you me, if the shoe were on the other foot and it were you and I who were being charged, who were being investigated, that case would have made it beyond the grand jury. Any lawyer knows there's a joke in the legal community that a prosecutor could indict a ham sandwich. And so what Black people in Kentucky and across this country are looking for is the same justice that applies. We need to have justice apply to all of us. You can't have a different standard for police or a different standard for white people, people with privilege, than Black people. We have to make sure that justice is the same across the board, and it isn't. And this is another example of that. And there is no one in the legal profession who should not be able to understand and articulate the difference in the grand jury process that these officers were afforded versus what someone else would have been afforded. And let me say this too, because it needs to be said. If a 26-year-old white woman was laying in her bed and police killed her, and let me correct myself because they're quick to correct you on the laying in the bed. She was not killed in her bed. She was asleep when they hit the door. She did have time to get up. They actually killed her in the fetal position. She was laying on the floor, which would explain that last sixth shot that went through her foot. Now, that being said, if a 26-year-old white woman was killed in this way in March, in September, we would know at least whether or not the warrant was good that the police officers went in on. By now, we would have had charges. There is a different standard for justice. It is, again, very obvious to me and others that our lives do not matter in Kentucky, that we are not valued in Kentucky. And that is just the real truth. And the problem with not saying it out loud is that you cannot fix it. We cannot fix what we will not face. What we seem to want here, Dia, in Louisville, it is very interesting. People are so ready to get back to their normal lives and their business as usual. Well, there will be none of that. There can be no business as usual. We are tired of this. I am amazed at the stamina of a community that could march for 118 days. That says something about the level of discontent in the city, in the Black community. And one thing you have to celebrate, and I always find reasons to celebrate and to smile, because I will not allow my soul to be defeated and weighed down with all of this. But these marches, these rallies, the demonstrations that have been held have been very integrated, very integrated. So while we certainly have challenges, we have strong white allies and strong allies of other races, other cultures who are standing with us to say, enough is enough. Enough is enough. And so I expect change, but quite frankly, I expect resistance. And I think our Attorney General yesterday showed resistance. He did it with beautiful words. He is a good speaker. That being said, I think we better be careful not to get caught up in the rhetoric and not looking at the work, because I have practiced law and I know how easy it is for a grand jury to indict. And they probably, generally, a grand jury, I mean, they might indict 12 people in an hour. It's that fast. And any of us who've represented anybody criminally, when you get the grand jury tape, it's probably 5 minutes, it might be 10 minutes. It doesn't take long. And so I want to understand better, what was the process? What did he recommend to the grand jury? What was presented to this grand jury?
And when you say the words matter, it's the words that we're missing or the words that were omitted, because we're understanding now that Brett Hankinson, was indicted for very minor infractions, if you will, with life loss. But they were not even for Breonna's life. It was for someone who was outside of the context of this conversation. So how does that make Black Louisville feel?
Well, Hankinson was indicted for wantonly shooting into the homes of neighbors who I believe were white. So how does it make us feel? It reminds us that our lives are not protected here, that people, police officers can do what they want and there are no real consequences. And so people in Louisville right now are in a lot of pain. And I don't think we are alone in it, because this is not siloed behavior. Part of our pain is that we have watched what has happened across this country. We have seen the police and how they have responded. We were motivated in Louisville. Obviously, this case gained a lot more attention after the George Floyd case, when we watched the police officer kneel on his neck and you see someone being peaceful and actually being murdered on video, and the police were fully aware that they were being recorded. I mean, that's how little our lives matter in America, that a police officer can see the camera and still continue the behavior and expect no consequences. Now, in that case, we hope that we will see significant consequences, and I mean a full prosecution, success in that prosecution, and prison for the rest of those officers' lives. I think we have to focus on that. But here in Louisville, Kentucky, we have not evolved to that. And we got a lot of pushback because there was no video camera evidence in this case. Well, you know, hard for us to have video camera evidence when the officers went in without body cameras on, or on their persons, or even turned on for those of them who had them. So this has been an uphill climb. It is a painful reminder of who we are in this country and the work that we have to do. I am certainly one of the first to admit that we have come far, and even with the protests, we've come far. I mean, the successes, the things that have changed in the last 118 days in this community, banning of no-knock warrants, increased number, or just any number of social workers being able to respond with police officers, removal of the police chief. We've got our first Black female police chief coming October 1st. She'll be the interim police chief. There are so many things, police reforms that we have been able to get. So there's a laundry list of things that have happened as a result of the protests. And I think it's important for us to be clear about that, to make sure that people understand Daniel Cameron didn't hold all of our success. We certainly did want justice. We did, and we do. But most people understood that it was unlikely. And I'll tell you, but for those protests, Hankinson would not have been indicted even for wanton endangerment. They weren't thinking about indicting anyone in this case in March, in April. It wasn't until May when the community really raised its voices. In fact, if we had not protested, Kenneth would still be in jail. He probably would have been offered a deal he couldn't refuse. He might have been forced to take it because his family may not have had the money to pay his attorney. And he might have pled guilty, ended up in prison, served his time, and come out as a convicted felon, knowing full well that he had the right to the castle doctrine like any other person in this country or in this state. Stand your ground. And we learned that from Trayvon Martin. So there are so many things for Black Kentuckians to consider and think about, and ponder how it is that we move forward. I think it is also important for the rest of our city and state and people in our country to think about how it is that they help us to move forward, because this problem of racism is not a Black problem. We are suffering, but it is white people who have to change. It is not us. We cannot fix the problem of racism. They are going to have to do that on their own. And that does require some truthfulness. And you just haven't really seen much of that. And it's because it is so painfully uncomfortable to deal with the truth of the history of this country and even the current state of affairs. It is a difficult thing to deal with. And so this is where we find ourselves.
FBI going to get the same information that the grand jury did, and what do you think will happen with that?
Well, the FBI investigation is a separate investigation, and I expect let me give you an example. I expect the investigation for the FBI, I expect that they will finally be able to tell us whether or not this warrant was valid. I mean, we still don't know yet if the warrant was valid, because the Attorney General said that he focused on the actions of that day and what happened in Breonna Taylor's apartment. So we don't know if the warrant was good. We all have heard that the postal inspector says that they did not give certain information. Is that true or false? Did they find other information? I don't know the answer to that. Nobody in Louisville seems to know the answer to that. We haven't been told. So I expect the FBI investigation to be much more thorough. The challenge is that the FBI standard is so much higher because they have to prove intentional conduct. They have to prove intentional civil rights violations. And so without that, it's going to be an uphill climb for the FBI. And let's not fool ourselves about whether or not our federal government is interested in protecting our interests right now. I think everything is in despair in our country, and that is not to say that it has ever been a perfect union, but I find it today even more imperfect, and that is unfortunate. I think that the world that I have inherited is somehow even worse than the one that my mother left me, and that is a very, very sad thing to have to admit. But I am determined that this world will be better for my children. And that means that we have to fight. That means that those of us who are capable have to be courageous enough to lift our voices. And that means people with power and privilege who have the ability to create policies, things like housing policy. Why do we have so little affordable housing in our communities? Why does the wealthiest country in the world have such a significant homeless population? Why does Kentucky have that? Why can't we fix this? I mean, we're in a country that wrote stimulus checks to Harvard University in Texas and Ruth's Chris. I mean, that they didn't need, checks they didn't need, checks they sent back. So we have the money to fix things that we care about. We just don't care about Black people, and we don't care about poor people, because we somehow have been crazily convinced that these folks are lazy. Us who built this country, free labor, now suddenly we have been tagged as not working hard enough. It is offensive, it is dishonest, and as long as I am alive and breathing, I will tell the story of how wonderful we are.
I agree right there. Beautiful, Black, brown, all of us.
All of us.
The sad thing that was reported is that the Attorney General didn't fully disclose to Breonna's mother just what was going to happen and the extent or non-extent of conviction that was going to happen. And she had to find it out from her legal team and from the media. That's not right.
Well, you know, it takes courage to be honest, and you have to really believe in what you have done. And I don't know the Attorney General personally. I have certainly met him. He is it seems like a nice man when you're around him. He's not a rude person at all. But I imagine it would be difficult to look into the eyes of Tamika Palmer and tell her that it turns out your Black daughter doesn't matter to me, didn't matter to the grand jury, doesn't matter to Louisville, doesn't matter to Kentucky. That would be a very difficult conversation, but that is exactly what it must feel like for her. And I have said in other interviews, I will not allow myself to imagine the pain that she is in. I can't. I admire her strength and her having the wherewithal to encourage her attorneys to include police reform in the settlement agreement. I think that is, I've never seen that before. I've never seen anyone in negotiating their their civil settlement, that they would also negotiate police reform. I think that is a very, very important thing that she did. And I hope that she knows that this community is proud of her and stands with her. And again, I want to say this. It's not just Black people standing. We do have allies, and it is important for us to say that. I think that we are in a fight for the soul of our country, and we are probably at 49-51. I think the good guys are losing right now, and I think we need to regroup and keep pushing forward. But it is incumbent upon us to continue to push forward. I do believe, I am hopeful that the world can change, that Kentucky can change. But I think that that change is going to be painful. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of historical evidence that you can have lasting change without violence. And I am deeply concerned about that, because I see protesters regularly being peaceful and being met with violence, pepper bullets, tear gas, or just this dictate of you can't go further. You're on this street. We won't allow you to go further. Most people in America acknowledge that the systems that we are subject to are broken, and yet when we cry out and grieve, we're told, we shouldn't do it that way. We shouldn't do it this way. And we keep going back to people in power to say, what is it? How is it that you would want us to grieve? And I've been telling a lot of people lately, for those of you who watched Kaepernick kneel silently on that football field on Sunday nights, and you called to complain, or you got frustrated, you said, he's disruptive. I mean, a silent, kneeling Black man disrupted your fun time, and you watched his career be destroyed, if you complained about Cap, if you were upset about that, if you watched his career be destroyed and you were silent, you don't have the right to tell us how to process our pain. You don't have the right to tell people how to protest. We gave you silent pain and you did not respond to it. And so we have got to do something to make sure that our children are safe in this country and that their lives matter. And here's the beauty of Blackness. We don't want revenge. We don't want to pay white America back for everything that it has done to us. That is not our desire. All we want is justice. It is just that simple. We don't want to take anything from anybody else. We understand that the pie is big enough for you to eat and for me to eat too. Loving myself does not mean that I love you less, but I will not allow you to make my life not matter. I have done too much. I come from people who are too strong, who have survived too much. We are too resilient to continue to believe that we are not important to this country. And the thing is, they know that. That's why they don't like us on juries, because even when the defendant is white, even when the defendant is white, even when the person charged with the crime is white, we want the court, we want those lawyers to prove that case beyond a reasonable doubt, because we want justice for everybody. We want justice for everybody, not just ourselves. We will protect other people. And yesterday, the Attorney General mentioned, he said, some people may want revenge or something along that. He mentioned revenge, and it struck me. Revenge? We are the people who nursed babies after their fathers whipped us. We shaved men after they raped us. We have never wanted revenge. We have prayed for people who have, the family of George Floyd prayed for the police officers. What is the evidence that we want revenge? All we want is justice and fairness.
Inclusion.
Inclusion, to be able to have the opportunity to have access to the American dream. And some of us have always risen. I include myself, it looks like I've had some semblance of success, but the minute I walk into a room and people don't know the degrees, don't know the job, don't understand the title, I am just another one. And so all we want is for all of us to be able to have access. And I have to say this because somebody will. Well, why don't you talk about the crime in your communities? Why don't you talk about that? What are you going to do about that? My job is to work on that. I focus every day: jobs, justice, education, health, and housing. My answer to crime is that you would fund root cause change. You redline communities out of hope, out of the opportunity for prosperity, and then you tell me to go out and give people hope and convince them that they can do. Well, how can I do that when the system is built for them to fail? We have to change root cause. And another thing, our society is so segregated. People, unfortunately, kill people who they are around. So 89% of Black people who are killed by other Black people, and whites who are killed, 82% are killed by other whites. So this idea of this notion of Black on Black crime, it's not accurate, it's not true, it's not fair. It is just crime, and we need to change it. We all need to be invested in that. But how you fix that is you have phenomenal job training programs. You close the achievement gap. How can we continue to function in Kentucky like this with no commitment to closing the achievement gap? We have to have financial resources for that. We know that we've sent kids home now in this pandemic who will not have access to Wi-Fi. We know that in some cases we have multiple children in a household using one device. What kind of city, what kind of state does that? We can't find the money for everybody to have their own device, their own hotspot, whether they're in Eastern Kentucky, Lexington, or Louisville. What is your commitment to education? But you pay for them to go to prison? It's time for us to call it like we see it and change it. Not just call it out, but change it. And we can. and we can. I'm not on here today to tell you it is a hopeless situation. I am telling you injustice has reigned again. I am telling you that things are not fair and that people are in pain. But believe me, we can change this city that I sit in, the city you sit in, this state, and this country. We can do that. We just have to be intentional about being committed to doing it.
Committed together.
Together.
All groups.
All groups, everybody together.
Sadiqa, thank you so very much for taking this time. It gives us all sort of a renewed feeling, because I'll tell you, yesterday the wind was out of my sail a little bit, but now I feel bolstered again to go back out and fight the good fight again. And we thank you so very much, everyone, for listening in on our conversation on race.
And Dia, can I say one more thing, please?
Of course.
Please. Everybody who is emotional today, who has protested, whatever, make sure you vote. Please request your mail-in ballot. I tell people, take that mail-in ballot after you fill it in and go drop it off at the drop box, or go vote. Please vote early. Please use your voice. That we are now in Louisville taking this protest to the polls. We have to do that. You owe it to the people who died for you to get that vote to vote. Please do it.
That's right. That's some good advice.
Yeah.
And again, thank everybody for joining us on this conversation on the state of Black and everyone in Kentucky, because at the end of the day, we're all Kentuckians. We're all Americans. If you're interested in some other conversations, be sure to log on to all of the social media platforms on LEX18. Until next time, I'm Dia Davidson.